I stared at the Uber receipt in my hand, the numbers blurred by the rush of disbelief. The address, printed in black and white, was a place I didn't recognize. Not a place I'd ever heard of, let alone been to. My mind raced through the last few hours, trying to piece together the fragments of the night before. But all I had were questions, too many questions, and no answers. The receipt wasn't supposed to be a question. It was a simple confirmation of a ride my girlfriend, Erin, had taken last night while I was working late. But now, it felt like a betrayal. I crumpled the paper in my fist and tossed it onto the kitchen counter. The noise of it landing echoed in the silence of the apartment, and for a moment, it felt as though the whole world had stopped, just to let me breathe. But it wasn't enough. Nothing could be enough to slow the relentless pounding of my heart, the strange sense of dread that had taken root in my chest. Erin had never been a liar. She was kind, thoughtful, and everything I thought I wanted in a partner. We'd been together for nearly 3 years, sharing everything, the good, the bad, and everything in between. So, why now? Why was this happening? My brain struggled to make sense of it all. The receipt was the first crack. A little detail that, on its own, might have been nothing. But combined with the odd behavior I'd noticed over the past week, the sudden quietness, the late nights, the uncharacteristic distance, it felt like something was off. Something was wrong, and it wasn't something I could just ignore. I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling slightly as I unlocked the screen. Erin hadn't replied to my texts last night, or this morning, for that matter. Normally, she would have at least sent a quick good night or I'll be home soon, but there had been nothing. The silence between us had been thick and suffocating. I chalked it up to her being busy with work. Maybe she'd had a late meeting or something. But now, I wasn't so sure. The address. It lingered in my mind. I opened the Uber app and rechecked the receipt. Drop-off location, 126 Elmwood Avenue. The name of the building next to it was unfamiliar to me. It didn't ring a bell at all. There was nothing about it in my memory, no recollection of it being anywhere near the places we usually went. I stared at it for a while, trying to convince myself that it meant nothing, that I was overthinking it. But the more I looked at the words, the more I felt a sense of unease creeping up my spine. I took a deep breath, fighting back the panic that threatened to rise within me. What was I supposed to do with this? Should I confront her right now, or wait until she came home? No. I wasn't ready for that. I needed more answers. I couldn't just jump to conclusions without understanding what was really going on. But what was going on? The thoughts spiraled, and I felt a tightness in my chest, like I couldn't catch my breath. I'd seen Erin's phone light up a few times last week, quick glances, a name on the screen that she'd quickly hidden. But I hadn't thought much of it. People get texts all the time. But now, I wondered who that name had been. I wondered if that name was connected to this unfamiliar address. I had never felt this way before, suddenly unsure of everything. She had been my rock. The one person who always made me feel like I could trust her. But now, standing in our small kitchen, staring at a receipt that seemed to shatter that trust in an instant, I wasn't sure of anything anymore. I heard the front door click open, and I froze, heart hammering in my chest. Erin was home. I hadn't expected her this early. I wasn't prepared for this moment, wasn't ready for the confrontation, for whatever was coming next. The anxiety was almost unbearable. What if I was wrong? What if this was all a misunderstanding? But how could I ignore the nagging feeling in the back of my mind that something wasn't right? I turned to face her as she stepped into the room, her expression soft and unaware. Her eyes lingered on me for a second, maybe wondering why I was staring at her so intensely. "Hey," she said, a hint of exhaustion in her voice. "How was your day?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked at her closely, trying to catch any sign, any flicker of guilt, but she looked the same as always, unaware, casual, like everything was fine. The knot in my stomach tightened further, as if my body already knew what my mind didn't want to acknowledge. "Erin," I began, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. "Where were you last night?" Her brows furrowed, and she set her purse down on the counter. "I told you. I was at work, remember? I had that late meeting." I nodded, but the words felt hollow. They didn't fit anymore. They didn't explain the receipt, or the way she'd been avoiding my texts. "Yeah," I said slowly. "But this says you were dropped off somewhere else." I held up the Uber receipt, watching her face change as she took it in. Her eyes flickered to the paper, then back to me. For a moment, I thought I saw a flash of something, guilt, fear, before she quickly masked it with a forced smile. "Let me explain," she said, her voice suddenly tight, controlled. "It's not what you think. I didn't speak. I couldn't. The words stuck in my throat, too many questions swirling in my mind. Then tell me, I said, my voice strained. Tell me what this is. Her face fell, and for the first time in a long time, I saw her vulnerability. It was so raw, so real, that it made my stomach churn. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out at first. Then, with a sigh, she walked over to the counter and leaned against it, her arms crossed defensively. I wasn't at work last night, she admitted, her voice quiet. I didn't want to tell you this, but I've been seeing someone else. I know it's wrong, and I'm sorry, but I couldn't stop. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. The world tilted on its axis, and my vision blurred. The room suddenly felt too small, too suffocating. My mind was spinning, unable to process the weight of what she had just said. What? I finally managed to choke out. How long? Only a few weeks, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't supposed to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. I got lost. I felt like I couldn't breathe. The air felt thick and heavy, pressing down on my chest. Every word she said felt like a punch, each one worse than the last. A few weeks. She'd been seeing someone else behind my back for a few weeks. The realization was like a knife twisting in my gut. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what I was supposed to do next. My body felt like it was made of stone, unable to move, unable to react. All I could do was stare at her, waiting for something, anything, that might make sense of this mess. But there was no answer. No explanation that could take away the hurt, the betrayal. Only the sound of my heartbeat pounding in my ears, louder and louder, as if my body itself was trying to drown out the reality of it all. I wanted to scream, to cry, to ask 1,000 questions. But none of it mattered anymore. She had already answered the only one that really mattered. The trust one had in her was gone. And there was nothing she could say to fix that. I could feel the distance between us growing, the rift opening wider with each passing second. And as I looked at the receipt in my hand, the name of the address still burned into my mind, I realized one thing. This wasn't a relationship anymore. It was a lie. And I wasn't sure if I could ever go back from that. Her words hung in the air like smoke, acrid and suffocating. I've been seeing someone else. The phrase repeated in my mind, over and over, as if my brain were desperately trying to absorb the truth. I couldn't bring myself to look at her, not right away. I couldn't look into her eyes and pretend everything was normal anymore. Everything was broken, splintered beyond repair, and I was standing in the middle of it, unable to stop the destruction. I never wanted to hurt you, she had said. But wasn't this the very definition of hurt? How could she have known how much this would tear me apart? How could she stand there, telling me this, when just a few hours ago we'd been laughing together over breakfast, talking about our weekend plans? I felt the weight of the silence pressing down on me, smothering me. I couldn't even speak, it was like the air had been sucked out of the room. Everything felt distant, her, the apartment, the life we'd built. It was all slipping through my fingers, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I stared at the receipt again. 126 Elmwood Avenue. That address burned in my mind, but there was something deeper than the address, something more raw. There was the image of her, my Erin, the woman I thought I knew, showing up there, somewhere she never mentioned. My hand instinctively reached for my phone, and without thinking, I started typing. I had no plan, no real goal, but the need to know more was overwhelming. I looked up at her again. She was standing by the counter, arms crossed, avoiding my gaze. She was trying to protect herself, trying to shield herself from the fallout of the words she had just spoken, but I could feel the tremble in her posture, the way she refused to meet my eyes. I could tell she was scared. And I wanted to feel sorry for her. I did. I wanted to understand her, to make sense of this mess and forgive her. But something inside me, something much deeper than reason, was yelling at me not to. I opened a new message to the only number I didn't recognize, the number that had been texting her. The one I'd seen light up her phone over the past week, the one she'd quickly hidden every time I came near. Her work messages, she'd said. But I wasn't stupid. I knew what was going on now. Before I could even type a word, she stepped forward. Her eyes were filled with something I couldn't quite place, fear, shame, maybe even regret. But was it too late for any of that? Could I forgive her, knowing she'd been hiding something so massive from me? Please, she said, her voice cracking as she stepped into my space. Please let me explain. I didn't want this to happen. It wasn't planned. I didn't want to hear any more explanations. Her words felt like poison now, each one laced with dishonesty. What could she possibly say that would make this right? That would undo the truth? I had trusted her with everything, my heart, my thoughts, my entire future. And in return, she had betrayed me. She'd gone somewhere I never imagined she'd go. I didn't even know what the hell someone else meant anymore. Was it serious? Was it physical? Or was it just emotional? I didn't want to ask. I wasn't sure I could handle hearing the details. I began, my voice sounding unfamiliar even to myself. I don't want to know. I can't. The words caught in my throat, suffocating me. But there it was, the brutal truth. I didn't want to know. I didn't want to know who he was or how far this had gone. I didn't want to hear it, because hearing it would mean accepting it. Accepting that everything I'd believed was a lie. And I wasn't sure I could do that. Her eyes filled with tears now, her lip trembling as she stepped back. I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I swear. But I've been feeling so lost. I don't know when things started to fall apart, but they did. And I didn't know how to fix it. So I just started looking for something, someone else, and now I regret it. Regret? That was it? Was that really all she had to offer me? Regret? Regret, I repeated, bitterly. That's all you've got? After everything, all you can give me is I'm sorry? Her face crumpled, and she let out a sob, the kind of sob I had never heard from her before. I'm sorry, I don't know how to make this right. I was numb. Completely and utterly numb. My body didn't feel like mine anymore. My heart didn't feel like it was mine either. The hole in my chest had grown wider, deeper, with every word she spoke. I don't even know who you are anymore, I whispered, and the words tasted like acid. I could feel the anger and pain boiling up inside me, an explosion I wasn't sure how to contain. I didn't want to yell. I didn't want to lash out. But God, how could she do this? To me, to us? And why didn't I see it sooner? Why hadn't I been paying attention? I was going to tell you, Erin pleaded, reaching out to me, but I took a step back. I was planning to tell you. But I was too scared. And I didn't want to hurt you like this. Too late, I said, the words almost too heavy to form. You've already done it. Her face went pale, and I saw the shame in her eyes. The tears streamed down her cheeks as she wiped them away. I never meant for it to go this far, she whispered, her voice cracking. But it did. And I can't take it back. I wanted to scream. To shake her. To ask her why, over and over again. But I couldn't. I didn't have the strength. All I could do was stand there, stunned, watching as she fell apart in front of me. My mind was still reeling, trying to piece together everything she just confessed. And still, I couldn't comprehend it. I couldn't understand how this happened, how everything I thought we had could be shattered by a few reckless decisions, a few lies. I wasn't angry at her anymore. I wasn't even sure if I could feel anger. I just felt empty. I can't do this right now, I said, finally finding my voice. I need space. I need time. I need to think. She nodded, wiping her nose, trying to compose herself. But I could see the fear in her eyes. The fear that I was slipping away. That this was it, the end of everything. And maybe it was. I didn't know. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure, nothing would ever be the same. Not after this. I turned away from her then, unable to look at her any longer. I didn't have the energy to listen to her apologies, to hear her try to fix something that couldn't be fixed. I couldn't look at her without feeling the weight of the lies pressing down on me, suffocating me. The room felt too small. The apartment felt too empty. And I felt lost. I grabbed my coat from the back of the chair and walked toward the door, pausing for just a second to glance back at her. She was still standing there, frozen in place, staring at me as if she was waiting for me to say something, anything. But there was nothing left to say. Not anymore. I stepped out into the cold air, the door shutting softly behind me. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. All I knew was that I couldn't stay there. Not with her. Not after everything that had just been laid bare. Everything I thought I knew was gone. And I didn't know how to get it back. I walked aimlessly down the street, my coat collar turned up against the chill of the evening air. The world seemed to move in slow motion, like I was in a dream that I couldn't wake up from. The city felt vast and unfamiliar, and yet every corner, every street lamp, seemed to reflect the emptiness that had suddenly consumed me. It wasn't just her betrayal, it was the weight of everything I thought I understood about love, trust, and partnership. Was it all a lie? Or was it simply that we had changed, both of us, without realizing it until it was too late? I thought back to the last few months. The small signs, the moments I had brushed off or convinced myself didn't matter. I should have seen it, shouldn't I have? Maybe I had been too wrapped up in the rhythm of daily life to notice the cracks forming beneath the surface. Or maybe I had wanted so desperately to believe in us that I refused to see the truth. I pulled my phone from my pocket, my thumb hovering over the number I had texted earlier. The one that had made everything clear, that had shattered any doubt I had left. My heart sank as I thought of the messages I had sent, but more than that, I felt a deep, gnawing regret. Regret for not confronting her sooner. Regret for not asking the questions that needed to be asked. Before I could type a single word, the screen lit up with a new notification. Erin, please, Matt. Let me explain. I'm so sorry for everything. We can work through this, I swear. I stared at the message for what felt like an eternity. The words burned, each one a reminder of the trust one had given her, the trust one had lost. I knew she was sorry, but how could that possibly change anything now? Could apologies ever make up for the fact that she had let someone else into the space I thought was ours? Could anything make this right? My fingers hovered over the keyboard, then dropped. I couldn't answer her. I couldn't even look at the phone anymore. It felt like I was holding onto a piece of glass, knowing that if I squeezed too hard, it would shatter and cut me open. And maybe that was what I needed, an end to this pain. A clean break. But I didn't know how to make it stop. How to stop the rush of questions flooding my mind, the images of her with someone else, the way she had lied to my face for so long. The weight of betrayal was a heavy thing. It pressed on my chest, leaving no room for air. I walked faster now, as if I could outrun the memories, the hurt, the confusion. But no matter how far I walked, I knew it would always be there, following me like a shadow, lurking just behind me. There was no escaping it. I turned down an alleyway, seeking solitude, seeking somewhere I could think, without the constant reminder of the life I had just walked away from. The world around me was a blur, streetlights flickered overhead, the distant sound of traffic a low hum in the background. I found myself standing under the dim light of a closed cafe, the light spilling out from inside casting long shadows against the pavement. I leaned back against the brick wall, staring up at the sky. It was clear tonight, the stars twinkling faintly in the distance. For a moment, I thought about how small everything seemed compared to the chaos inside my head. How insignificant my pain felt against the vastness of the universe. And yet, in this moment, my world felt as if it had collapsed in on itself. The text alert from Erin buzzed again. Another message. Erin, I can't lose you. You mean everything to me. I swallowed hard. Her words should have meant something to me. They should have comforted me, but all I felt was a deep sense of hollowness. How could she say that now? After everything? How could she expect me to believe that when her actions told me a different story? I looked at the screen for a long moment, my heart racing, my mind racing, but the only thing that came to mind was the thought that kept repeating itself like a drumbeat: how could I ever trust her again? I thought about the person I had been before this. The person who believed in love with all my heart. The person who believed that when two people committed to each other, they would face everything together. I thought about the future I had imagined, our future, together. The house we would buy, the family we would raise. It was all gone now. And maybe it was never real to begin with. The quiet moments between us, the ones I had cherished the most, now felt like echoes of a past I couldn't return to. The warmth of her hand in mine, the way she'd laugh at my bad jokes, the way she'd fall asleep on the couch while I worked. All of it was tainted now. All of it felt like a lie. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, trying to make sense of everything that had just happened. But there was nothing that made sense. Nothing at all. I thought about calling my best friend, Nick. He would know what to say. He always did. But I didn't want to burden him with this, not yet. Not when I still hadn't figured it out for myself. So I just stood there, in the dark, alone with my thoughts, unsure of where to go next. And then, in the stillness, I heard it, a faint sound, almost like a voice, calling out to me from the distance. I turned, but there was no one there. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe I was imagining things, but in that moment, I couldn't help but wonder, what if she really meant it? What if we could fix this? I didn't know. But for the first time, I realized I needed to decide. I needed to make a choice, one that would either mend this shattered part of my life, or mark the end of it altogether. The silence that followed was unbearable. The world outside felt impossibly distant, like I was moving through a fog, completely disconnected from reality. I wandered the streets aimlessly, not knowing where I was going or what I was hoping to find. The cold air bit at my skin, but it was nothing compared to the numbness I felt inside. I couldn't shake the images of Erin's face, tear-streaked and apologetic. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that her apologies didn't matter. Not anymore. What could she say that would fix this? What could she say that would erase the betrayal? I pulled my phone out of my pocket and stared at it for a few seconds, considering the messages I'd been composing in my head for the past hour. The ones I never sent. The ones that were just too raw, too angry to put into words. Instead, I found myself typing the address from the receipt again, 126 Elmwood Avenue. I had Googled it before I left, but the results hadn't made me feel any better. It was a residential street in a neighborhood I didn't recognize. A place that meant nothing to me, except for the fact that it was tied to her. To Erin. I didn't know what I was expecting. A moment of clarity? A sign that everything would somehow make sense? There were no answers waiting for me. There were only questions. And the more I searched for the truth, the more it slipped away, like sand through my fingers. I stopped walking. I was standing in the middle of a quiet park, the lights of the city flickering in the distance. My hands were trembling as I held the phone in front of me. I couldn't stop myself. Without thinking, I pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice. My heart pounded in my chest, louder than the ringing. Then, on the third ring, she picked up. Hello? Erin's voice sounded small and fragile, like she was walking on thin ice. I swallowed, unsure of what to say. The anger was still there, bubbling just beneath the surface, but something deeper, a kind of emptiness, had taken its place. Why didn't you tell me? I finally asked, my voice hoarse. There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear her breathing, slow and shaky, and for a moment, I wondered if she was crying. The thought made me feel nothing. I was going to, she said, the words barely audible. I just didn't know how. I didn't know if I could. Could have what? I almost spat the words. Could have told me? Could have trusted me? I didn't want to hurt you. You have to believe that. I never wanted this. I don't know if I believe you, I said softly, staring at the ground beneath my feet. It felt like the earth was swallowing me up, taking everything I had left. I just don't understand how it happened. I don't either, she whispered. But I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. I never wanted to lose you. Then why didn't you tell me sooner? The question was like a jagged rock in my throat, cutting me with each syllable. Why wait until it was too late? Another long pause. I could tell she was fighting to hold it together. I don't have a good reason. I thought I could fix it on my own. And I thought if I told you, it would be over. And I didn't want that. I closed my eyes, the weight of her words pressing down on me. I wanted to scream at her, to demand answers, to make her feel the pain she had caused. But deep down, I knew that wouldn't fix anything. It wouldn't bring back what we had. And it certainly wouldn't undo the damage. I don't know what to do with this, I said, my voice almost a whisper. Matthew, her voice broke, and for a brief moment, I heard the person I once loved. The Erin I remembered. The Erin who cared. But it was too late. The cracks were too deep, the hurt too profound. I need space, I said, cutting her off. I can't do this. Not right now. Matthew, please. I ended the call before she could finish. I couldn't listen to her anymore. I couldn't bear the sound of her voice, the pleading, the regret, it was all too much. And it wasn't enough. I stood in the park, staring at the screen of my phone. The call history showed her number, but there was nothing else. No answers. No resolution. Just the echo of her voice, fading away like everything else in my life. I felt like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, waiting for something to pull me back from the fall. But there was no one to pull me back. There was only the void. I turned around and began walking again, this time without any real direction. The city around me was still awake, still moving, while I felt like I was stuck in place, unable to move forward. What was I supposed to do with all this? How could I continue living in a world that no longer felt real? I didn't know. And maybe that was the hardest part. The not knowing. The uncertainty. All I knew was that I couldn't go back to Erin. Not now. Not after everything she'd done. And I couldn't keep living in this haze of confusion, this place between hurt and anger, between love and betrayal. Somewhere, in the distance, I could hear the faint sound of music, someone playing a guitar, or maybe it was just the wind. I wasn't sure. But I followed the sound, hoping that it would lead me somewhere, anywhere, other than where I was now. I didn't have all the answers. Hell, I didn't have any answers. But I knew one thing: I needed to find a way out of this. A way to breathe again. And somehow, I would. Even if I had to do it alone. The days that followed felt like they were suspended in time, each one dragging on longer than the last. I couldn't shake the feeling that everything around me had been reduced to a series of moments I had no control over. It was as if I had stepped outside of my own life and was watching it unfold from a distance, powerless to change it. I didn't call Erin back. I didn't reach out to anyone for advice. I barely spoke to my friends, not because I didn't need them, but because I didn't know how to explain what had happened. How could I? How could I admit that everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and even myself had been turned upside down? But despite the chaos inside me, there were small steps I began taking. Things that, while simple, slowly began to pull me out of the dark hole I'd fallen into. I went back to work, dragging myself through the motions. I found comfort in the routine, the familiar faces, the tasks that didn't require me to think too hard. It felt good to not have to make decisions for once, to just exist without the constant questioning. The world didn't stop turning because I was hurting. The world didn't pause to wait for me to figure things out. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, I started to heal. There were moments when I'd catch myself thinking about Erin, about the life we'd planned, the future I had imagined, and it would hit me like a wave. The rawness would resurface, the hurt, the anger, the betrayal. But each time, it didn't feel as intense as before. Each time, the pain began to ebb away just a little bit more. I started exercising again, something I had neglected for weeks. The gym became my escape, my place to release the tension in my body, to focus on something physical instead of emotional. I lost myself in the rhythm of the weights, the pounding of my feet on the treadmill. In a strange way, it was like starting over. Each set of representatives was a chance to shed a little more of the past. One evening, a few weeks after the call, I found myself standing in front of my apartment building, staring at the door that used to feel like a safe haven. My fingers brushed against the cool metal handle, and for a second, I hesitated. It had been a long time since I'd let myself really reflect on my life, on what I needed, what I wanted. The door opened, and I stepped inside. The apartment was eerily quiet. I hadn't really let it sink in before, but now, as I set my keys on the counter, the silence was deafening. It felt wrong. I walked into the living room, my gaze falling on the empty space where Erin's things had once been. It was like a chapter had been ripped from the story of my life, and I was left trying to fill in the gaps. But as I stood there, staring at the room that used to be filled with her laughter, I realized something: I was still here. I was still standing, still breathing. And somehow, that felt like a victory. I took a deep breath, letting the weight of the moment wash over me. I had been so consumed by the need for answers, for closure, that I had forgotten something important. I didn't need anyone else to define me. Erin had been a part of my life, but she wasn't my life. She didn't hold the power to determine my worth, my future, my happiness. And so, I began to reclaim those things for myself. The next few weeks were a blur of self-discovery. I dove into hobbies I'd neglected, reconnected with old friends, and started going out for drinks after work. I found myself laughing again. I started to enjoy life without the constant shadow of Erin looming over me. But even as I moved on, there were still moments of doubt. I would catch myself checking my phone for a message from her, or wondering what it would be like to run into her in the grocery store. Would I feel anything? Would I still care? The truth was, I didn't know. And that was okay. I didn't need to have all the answers right away. I didn't need to figure it all out. One afternoon, a few months later, I was sitting at my desk when I saw her name flash across my phone screen. I didn't hesitate this time. I didn't feel the gut punch of betrayal. I just picked up the phone and swiped to answer. Matthew, Erin's voice came through, softer than I remembered, almost tentative. Erin, I interrupted, holding my breath. I don't know what you want me to say. I'm sorry, she said, her voice trembling. I know it's too late, but I just wanted to say that I regret everything. I regret hurting you. I felt a flicker of something, maybe sorrow, maybe understanding, but it didn't hurt the way it used to. It didn't ache in my chest, demanding my attention. It was just a feeling. A memory. I think I've been holding on to this idea of you and me for too long, I said slowly. I'm sorry for the way I reacted back then. But I've moved on, Erin. I have to. For my own sake. I understand, she whispered. There was a long pause, and for a moment, we both just sat in the quiet. It felt like the final conversation we were meant to have. Not one of anger or blame, but of acceptance. We had shared something, but that time had passed, and we were both ready to move on. "I hope you're happy, Erin," I said, finally. "I really do." "I hope you are, too," she replied, a hint of sadness in her voice. And that was it. The call ended, and I set my phone down, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. It wasn't a perfect closure. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. But it was enough. I had learned to forgive, not just her, but myself, too. I had learned that healing didn't come from answers. It came from acceptance, from understanding that life moved forward, whether we were ready or not. The days went by, and life continued to unfold in unexpected ways. I met new people, experienced new things, and found new joys in the small moments. Erin's presence in my life no longer haunted me. It was like a shadow that had long since faded, leaving only the sunlight behind. I wasn't who I had been when I first found that Uber receipt. I was someone new. Someone stronger. Someone who had learned to navigate the storms, not by avoiding them, but by finding my way through them, one step at a time. And maybe, just maybe, that was all I needed to find peace.